The best letter we get this week, I will make you a sterling silver Zaryas charm for your keychain. And you can have it, and you can say, a guy I listened to bitch about TV on the internet made this, and I won it as a prize.
Welcome to Shout on TV American Gods, the unofficial podcast companion piece to the Starz series American Gods. I'm one of your hosts, Gene Lyons, and alongside me is my co-host, the King Bee.
This fucking guy.
And this is our deep dive edition where we look back and offer our thoughts and research, plus the top listener voicemail and email for the week. If you haven't already, please subscribe to our sister podcast, Shat the Movies, at shatthemovies.com, and our Twitch stream at shatontv.com/Twitch. This week's edition of Shat on TV American Gods is covering Season 3, Episode 2, Serious Moonlight. I was worried after Episode 1 that we might have a letdown in Episode 2, as often we do see in the sophomore episode of any show. But Lakeside is just such a great setting. It's full of places and people to explore. It really feels more worn in than anything we've seen so far in the show. And I know you make fun of it, but Ricky Whittle's look, I think, is really coming together. Now, he's not technically wearing a parka, which is giving me fits. That is just a wool coat, it looks like. But he's got it on. He's got that collar up, kind of that, like, Constantine sort of look there. The hair, the beard. I mean, they're actually addressing his sex appeal and his exoticness and actually having people react to the fact that he is brown and that his arms are gigantic. And it's working for me. He's got some mojo in this season.
Well, at least they put him in a hat. All right, gang. Gene, I know you don't want to hear it, but I'm going to beg your indulgence for just a minute here. Seinfeld was pitched as the show about nothing. American Gods, I submit to you, is the show about very, very little. Yes, they're bringing you these incredibly lush visuals. They're really working to establish these moods and these emotion. The scenes are just wet with feeling. But I keep asking myself, to what purpose? We spend so much time, in my opinion, for so little effect. Last episode, we get introduced to Cordelia, the fiancé. She has 0 lines. This episode, she shows up in the back alley. I was just kidding. I'm not the fiancé. I'm the driver. Which to me says her original introduction is superfluous and added nothing to the show. We could have been doing something else with that time. We're spending time at a funeral for someone who died in the first episode of the last season. And really all we're getting out of that is the reintroduction of a coin that was given to Shadow for reasons I bet a lot of viewers kind of forgot even existed. Beyond that, we get to see fan favorite Chernabog showing up saying fucking and yelling at Wednesday a lot. They slap each other around. But why? What's the point here?
So I think the answer is right under your nose, but you're too stubborn to see it. This is about continuity. Now, last episode, you complained that American Gods puts a bunch of stuff on screen that goes nowhere. As you said very eloquently, it's cause without effect and effect without cause. But the truth is, I think we're getting really solid continuity on several storylines that's building a world after 2 seasons of utter chaos. So check it out. So Cordelia, you raised that issue, right? Now, in the season premiere, we're introduced to Cordelia, and you ask, why don't we know more about her? Did she not talk to Shadow the whole drive in the van? Isn't he curious about her? What's she all about? Then in episode 2, as if the showrunners could hear you, they give us those answers. She clearly didn't talk to Shadow because there wasn't a human connection, and Wednesday was right there. Like Wednesday, her employer, was present. Now she's telling Shadow, another human being in the cold outside a god party, someone she can now relate to, that she's apparently a lesbian hacker who took a job to help Wednesday with tasks and technology. Perhaps it's far-fetched, but there is the continuity there. She had bills to pay. He made them go away. Makes sense to me.
But couldn't you also have just done all of that in her original introduction, or cut the original introduction and done it right here? It would have made a lot more sense in a narrative sense to me. I guess after 2 seasons of utter chaos, as you put it, I'm just not ready to forgive.
Okay, so maybe I don't have you sold on the Cordelia thing, but I think they did a great job of this continuity with the Thunderbirds. So in episode 1, we get hints of thunderbirds, but only in the Menominee language, right? Nobody's walking around the episode talking about thunderbirds. We're not getting flashes of thunderbirds, just a little bit in the smoke of a couple faces. We know from the encounter with Whiskey Jack that they're going to offer Shadow guidance. So they establish a fact about the thunderbirds. In this episode, we're again shown thunderbirds in the episode's opening, but not the birds themselves, just the shadow cast over the land. Now, last week, King B, you talked about how thunderbirds battle the great horned snake. And again, in a beautiful show of continuity, in a beautiful show of paying attention to where they're leading the audience, the showrunners echo that lesson as a natural progression of the revelation. We get in the actual narration that it's talking about the thunderbirds battling a great horned snake. They're not even showing the thunderbirds. And I think, again, talking about flash over substance here, they are holding back in certain areas. In certain areas. It's not a complete show of discipline, but in certain areas, they are holding back on the visuals and investing in this storytelling and suspense. They are actually building on things as opposed to just throwing things scattershot in our faces. So Alison's another example of that. Now, we saw her as that awkward girl crushing on Shadow in the season premiere as they get off the bus, but they don't just, make it a one-time thing. She appears again as the girl in the shop who's crushing on him, and then she disappears, triggering a real mystery and explaining why people in the town turn on Shadow, right? We're getting facts established over time that give us a consistent narrative. He's the new guy in town. She's an attractive young girl, just old enough to catch a man's attention at 17 years old or so. She was seen with Shadow the day he was dropped off on the bus. She was dangerously close to him at the sporting goods store. It makes sense. They've earned this one. And a lesser show, or maybe previous seasons of American Gods, would have just had god magic that changed everyone's minds overnight. Shadow wakes up one day and everybody's being weird. Here, in this case, there might be supernatural events at play, but the motivations are quite human. And I think they've taken this show into another gear where it's a mystery rather than a fantasy.
I will say that girl delivered a great little performance, and I'm embarrassed to say that when they declared she was missing, I actually thought, oh, she was a sweet kid. I really hope she's okay.
Guys, this is a really big breakthrough for the King Bee. But let's actually talk about Alison's abduction. So there was a scene where Shadow's looking out the window. He sees Chad Mulligan, the cop, and Chad is talking to Marguerite Olson, the journalist, and the pink car is parked outside. Shadow is looking through the window. I know we don't normally do play-by-plays by scenes, but this is very important because it was a moment where I looked at the screen and I thought, I'm invested in this mystery, and the show has actually become quite interesting. And although we might already have that mystery figured out, it doesn't really take much to figure this mystery out. That's not what it's about. It's about watching the characters work their way through it. And this could get very interesting for the audience, as opposed to what I think we've been shown before was basically, as you said, King B, it's the writers had some thoughts and then they were like, let's just have these thoughts on screen, as opposed to let's make something fun for the audience to watch. And kudos to American Gods for being intelligent enough to actually take this storyline back to 1690, right? This is something that you and I talked about with Fargo season 4, right? Where you can show the history of a place to give us a sense of how people would react in that place, of cycles that happen in that place, of the rules for the show. And in this episode, we see American Gods show us in America before 1776, which I believe now more than ever people need to be reminded of, right? We think of our country as young, which it is, but this land is old. And the history of Europeans here goes back centuries.
And it's shitty.
Yeah, it is shitty. So we know French explorers began showing up in Wisconsin in the early 1600s. And we know that Lakeside's history goes back through generations of prosperity, right? It's this bastion of prosperity in this, frozen, lonely, desolate landscape of rural Wisconsin. So when we see this opening scene of barbaric conquest in 1690s Wisconsin, I'm guessing this is where modern day Lakeside sits. We're getting the origin story of Lakeside. And again, those thunderbirds are swooping overhead as we're seeing native people slaughtered. The importance here is that we see in this scene Europeans taking the land and then praying for favorable weather. And we can see here that there was a sacrifice that triggered it all.
And for those of you not paying attention at home, one of the voices of these trappers or explorers was notably French. And then they come across the child. They go to prepare that sacrifice, and the guy suddenly has a very Nordic accent to him. His language is Nordic. He's obviously making a sacrifice to Odin. Could it be that this is where the big split between Whiskey Jack and Odin takes place?
If you look at the alphabet, right, like Nordic, Ancient Germanic, it looks like runes to me, right? And so, yeah, it could be that split. Another explanation is that it could be, again, an appeal to a Germanic god, whether it's Tyr, maybe it's Hinzelmann, like as a kobold. I don't know. I mean, it seems like a big job for a kobold to change weather. But if you guys know, write in. We could always use your help. Host at shadowontv.com or host at shadowontv.com or call us at 914-719-SHAT. But regardless of which way you read that, you get this prayer, the child's throat is slit, and then the weather clears up. And I think this means that Lakeside has prospered based on the power of sacrifice to renew this pact. So you're probably thinking right now, Gene, King B, what the fuck does this have to do with Alison disappearing? Well, she's a kid. She's gone missing. We know Shadow didn't do it. And at the end of the episode, we see this Thunderbird shadow sweeping over that clunker that's on the frozen lake. So Shadow was told in episode 1 that Thunderbirds would guide him. And then we last saw Thunderbirds flying over the child sacrifice in the episode's opening scene. So no spoilers here, but I think you see where this is headed.
Let's talk for a minute about this game. In that little town, they've got a game every winter where they park an old clunker car out on the frozen lake and they take bets on the day and time in which it sinks into the water. Gene, you think they pull the battery out of that thing or drain it of the engine oil that's inside of it? Or are they just dumping toxic chemicals into their little tiny lake year after year after year?
I would really hope for Hinzelmann's fly fishing business that, well, I guess you don't fly fish on lakes, do you? Isn't that a river thing?
I guess it's a river thing.
Yeah, so she doesn't give a fuck.
I guess not. But people got to swim there.
It's true.
Any sense seems like a really irresponsible anti-environmentalist game to play. Find something better to sink in the lake, lady.
Listen, if you know how to prep a car for lake sinking, write us at host@shadowontv.com. Also, if you know how to use a fly in fly fishing, please call in 914-719-SHAT.
Excellent.
Now, King B, I was very excited to see some of the returning characters in this episode. Some of them were a bit lackluster. I think Salim was kind of just a throwaway in here, but we did have a lot of the gods coming back.
Yeah, we got the real God Squad coming on strong. One of my beefs I had mentioned earlier is that we do go to a funeral for one of the Zaryas, which I think is a little late in the game considering how long ago she was killed. Maybe it's a COVID thing. It was all timing. They couldn't all get there right away. But we get a visit from fan favorite Chernabog. Chernabog showed up way, way back in season 1. He's that guy from those BMW commercials. He carries a big bloody hammer. He seems to be a leader amongst these Slavic deities that are all hanging out. Shadow lost a bet with this guy over a fucking game of checkers of all things. And now Chernabog gets to crush his skull with his hammer someday. Seems like a really short-sighted plan on Shadow's part, but I don't know. They'll sort it out eventually. Anyway, Chernabog, he's an old Eastern European god that predates Christianity by a real good measure. He's sort of the yang to a Slavic yin that we have yet to see or discuss in the show. Ancient Slavs used to worship a light god and a dark god equally. Belbog, he was the light god, and Chernabog, he's the dark god. Old Slavs used to claim that all good things were blessings of Belbog and all misfortune and evil were the machinations of Chernabog. Remember that big shadowy figure, the big shadowy devil in Fantasia? That's Chernabog.
Now, King B, you pointed out that Peter Stormare was in BMW commercials. Shat the Movies listeners would recognize him from Fargo as well, where he was fucking fantastic. It was good to see him back, and I found myself mildly amused by that Gomez Adams Uncle Fester dance that he did with Ian McShane. And as a reminder, the reason why Chernabog is so upset with Mr. Wednesday is that he blames him for Zaryas' death at the hands of that sniper in the diner ambush. So if you remember, there was a sniper that had like the Latin inscription on the bullets that was sent by Mr. World and fired into the diner where the gods were, and Zaryas caught one, right? But shout out to both of these guys. Honestly, Peter Stormare's in his late 60s. Ian McShane's in his 70s. They really got past their flabby arms and creaky bones to like bring us a show. I mean, they really, really tried it, even if it was an Addams Family ripoff.
You could crack a hip falling on the floor like that.
Did you see McShane's arms, though? Look like pterodactyl wings.
But yeah, you wouldn't want him to get a hold of you, though. Old man strength is something to behold.
And those chompers.
Oh, jeez, Louise. They really are brand factory fresh chompers.
Reddit has been alight with talk of the Ian McShane teeth.
Oh, God bless him. So we've been talking about the Zaryas, and you're probably wondering what the heck we're going on about. You remember those 3 broads that are living with old Cherney in season 1? These ladies represent an old Slavic myth, the myth of the Zaryas. Zarya Otenya is the morning star. She opens the gates to the god's palace for the sun to come. She's the bookish one that's played by a grossly underused Martha Kelly. Martha Kelly's a comedian. She was opposite Zach Galifianakis on that FX show Baskets. It's amazing. She's hilarious. I don't think she has one line of dialogue in this whole fucking show. It's a shame. Anyway, go check her out there. Then you've got the Zarya Verchenya. Yeah, I pronounced it right. How about that? She's the evening star, and she's responsible for closing the gates to God's palace once the sun returns. She was played by the old lady Cloris Leachman. Cloris is a fantastic Hollywood legend. She's got almost 300 acting credits on the Internet Movie Database. You're going to recognize her from her hilarious run on Malcolm in the Middle, or as the famous Frau Blücher in Young Frankenstein. Finally, you've got Zorya Polonchaya, the Midnight Star. She's the youngest of the 3 sisters. She gave Shadow a coin to replace the one he took from Sweeney way back in season 1. Remember how important that coin was? Anyway, this Zorya never existed in any actual myths or legends. Neil Gaiman completely made her up for the book because we can't have some old broad or some bookish housefrau having charged, meaningful interactions with a sexy, handsome Shadow Moon. It's got to be that young, lithe beauty. It's a real disservice to both the other actresses, if you ask me, but she plays her part. There you go.
Yeah, Shadow and his dad, Wednesday, show up to this memorial, and each of them bring just the right gifts, and they both come underdressed. I think that this was trying to establish in a very stylistic way that Shadow is a chip off the old block. And one fun Easter egg is that Shadow brought Otrenyaya a passionate reunion in Fiji. That's the book that he brought her, which is like a fucking Harlequin paperback. It's a trash romance novel that is described as nothing phases workaholic billionaire Massimo Briatore. Not even the idea of his estranged wife Livia accompanying him to Fiji for a family celebration. He's sure he'll have no problem pretending for one weekend that their whirlwind marriage is still intact until he lays eyes on her again. It's fucking brilliant. Like it's a nothing book, and that's what she likes to read. Part of the reason for the timing of this memorial is Koliada, which is an ancient pre-Christian Slavic and Baltic winter festival. So later, this was, of course, as many things that predate Christianity was incorporated into Christmas, and that's why they have to be there on that specific date.
If you like drinking on Koliada with some Slavs at the bar.
What?
You didn't see that one coming, did you?
No.
Now, everyone came together at this big celebration kind of as a result of Tyr, who allows his invitation to get stolen by Wednesday. Now, historically, Tyr is another son of Odin. He's well-liked by many cultures. This guy really historically got around. The Romans worshipped Tyr. They figured he was the same thing as Mars. He was their god of war. Germans, and I'm talking the old Germans, they worshiped this dude as the god of laws and order, which they closely equated with war. Go figure, the bad guys at 2 world wars worshipped a god of war and believed it was all in the spirit of lawful order. Dear America, please avoid any reflective services until otherwise notified. Anyway, according to Viking legend, here's how it goes. Loki fucked a wolf. That wolf made a pup, and that pup's name was Fenrir. Big paws on that puppy got all the gods to worrying that he might fuck him up. So they had the dwarves craft some chains to bind him. Fenrir takes a look at this and says, fuck all y'all, you're not fitting me for chains unless one of you is willing to put your hands in my mouth, so I know I can trust you. And good old Tyr steps right up to the plate, and he sticks his hand in Fenrir's mouth as they put the chains on. Those chains clap on, and Fenrir finds that he can't shake them loose, and gets real pissed and chomps Tyr's right hand right off. Tyr says, hey, fair is fair, and he goes on to become the greatest left-handed swordsman while the rest of the gods continue to bind Fenrir and fuck him up until Ragnarok comes. I can't figure out why the American Gods version of Tyr is jerking it to loose teeth, but he is played by Dennis O'Hare, who I always recognize from a bit part he has in the 2007 George Clooney movie, Michael Clayton, that I absolutely adore. It's a fantastic film.
And by the way, happy birthday to Dennis O'Hare, who just celebrated another trip around the sun last weekend. I hope we do see more of him in this series, in particular if he goes all, God mode like Chernabog does and starts fucking shit up.
I think he's another guy that you would recognize immediately, and the guy just always brings it 100%. By the way, if I can gripe just one more time, and this is it. Mm-hmm. Wednesday visits Tyr. Says, hey, man, I could use some help. I'm looking for donations. Tyr cuts him a great big old check. Wasn't Wednesday making cash fly out of ATMs and pulling schemes to get money left and right? Why is he needing donations from Tyr?
I think it's the power of a donation from a god gives him power.
Tribute, they would call it, maybe.
That's a better way to put it,
Yeah. And if he's the son of Odin and Shadow's the son of Odin, they're half-brothers.
And Loki fucked a wolf.
Big paws on a puppy. All right. Near the end of the episode, Shadow goes on a little walkabout gathering some firewood, hears some strange sounds, and he comes face to face with a giant peacock. It spreads his tail feathers and gives him a good old look. I immediately started Googling peacock gods and came up with a few options. I'm going to run through them all. I'm interested to know which one the fans think it is. By the way, the best letter we get this week, I will make you a sterling silver Zaryas charm for your keychain. And you can have it, and you can say, a guy I listened to bitch about TV on the internet made this, and I won it as a prize. You'll be the envy of all your friends. Anyway, let's talk about peacocks. The first peacock that I learned about was the Yazidi peacock, Melek Taus. Melek Taus is worshipped by the Yazidis. They're an actual small religious minority, mostly found in northern Iraq. It's a secretive religious practice. There's not a ton of info on it. I have to give the qualifier that I'm talking about the real world here. I feel absurd saying this, but there's not a lot of info out there about Melek Taus, the peacock angel, they call him. After God created the earth, according to the legend, he created a few archangels, the first amongst them being Melek Taus. Melek Taus given instruction, never bow to any other creation. A while later, God gets around to making man, the sons of Adam, and God gives the instruction that all other creations must bow to Adam. And they go and they look to Melek Taus, and Melek Taus says, no, not going to do it. I don't have to. I was sold. And God just kind of like gives him a nod and is like, yeah, that's my boy. And he makes Melek Taus sort of his number one right-hand man archangel. He's not good. He's not bad. He just kind of makes stuff happen as he sees fit. So any misfortune that you have, it's because Melek Taus felt you needed it. If something good happens, Melek Taus just felt like helping you out that day. Here's a fun fact. There's some Muslims out there that consider the idolization of Melek Taus to be devil worship because he denies the will of God when he refuses to bow to Adam. So, if you're a Muslim and you know more about Melek Taus and devil worship, send us an email. I'd love to hear from you.
Yeah, as a Persian, I should know more about Yazdis, but I don't.
Well, I did read, again, that it is a sort of secretive religious practice. A lot of it is shared through spoken word. They don't write a lot of stuff down.
Come on, Mom. Tell me your secrets.
Take notes.
So if you believe that this peacock was the Yazidi peacock, Melek Taus, write in. That's your bet.
The second peacock I found was the Lord Kartikeya. Now, the Hindus believe that Lord Kartikeya is the brother to Ganesha, the son of Parvati and Shiva. Now, when I was reading it, I was kind of in a hurry, and I read it as Havarti and Chevy, the famous cheese truck of the gods. I thought it was hilarious. Anyway, Kartikeya appears as a young man who rides a peacock. He's considered the god of war by the Hindus, although they've got, like, many gods of war. And them Hindus, they love that war. Probably not the peacock in question here, but it was worth mentioning for the Havarti joke.
Okay, so that's option 2, Kartikeya. By the way, if you don't think peacocks can be, like, warlike, they could be sons of bitches. Just saying.
I mean, it's just the spectacle.
They're loud, they're ornery.
I mean, visually, they're violent. Like, it's just so much to take in. Like, they're just hanging out, whatever, and then you just hear this whoosh, and they got that big old tail looking at you.
It's very Jurassic Park.
Yeah. And then finally, I gotta say, you guys remember Argus? Argus from season 1? The fat, bald guy covered in eyeballs? Gene, didn't he die or something?
Yeah, he got shocked.
He got shocked.
Yeah.
Is shocking enough to kill a god? So here's his tale. Argus, he was the all-seeing giant covered. He had 100 eyes. He had 100 eyes so that he could sleep and stay awake at the same time. This was a very valuable trait, according to the Greeks, I guess. Anyway, he was happy to mind his own biz and do his own thing until Hera got pissed that Zeus was banging a mortal. So Hera turns Zeus's new fling into a cow. And she says, "Hey, Argus, keep an eye on this fucking cow." Zeus sees this and says, "No." And he sends Mercury to kill Argus and help his girlfriend escape. Argus dies. Hera chooses to preserve the 100 eyes of Argus by immortalizing them in the tail of a peacock. So peacocks are sort of the god of vision or all-seeing sight. All-seeing sight. Yeah, that thing.
Sword of omens.
Sword of omens. What's the moral of this story? Gods clearly do not give a fuck about the working man.
Okay, my money's on the Argus theory. That sounds right to me.
Well, you did read the book, so you might be biased. Wouldn't it be nice to live, like, you got a shitty life, you're a big fat 100-eyeball monster sitting in a dark closet, you get electrocuted to death, yeah, that's rough. But then you come back as a beautiful peacock in the woods.
Of Wisconsin.
Yeah. That's not a bad gig.
Yeah.
So, again, place your bets, send us a letter, who you think it is, back up your claim. The best letter, you get a Zaryas keychain.
The one god I wanted to talk about in this episode was Billquis, who we saw in episode 1 of season 3. And she is a bit different now. So interestingly, she does not want to be touched, but she does want to demonstrate her power when insulted by this guy, William Huntington Sanders, who's like a stand-in for big tech, right? Now, Sanders is played by the brilliant Gil Bellows, who's an Amazon Prime Video's Patriot. Seriously, we've mentioned it twice now in this podcast. Watch it. It's really, really good. But anyway, she has a standoff with this guy. He insults her essentially and says he can do whatever the fuck he wants because he's big tech. She gets naked, gets on top of him, and of course, vaginally ingests him. What was interesting about this whole scene, though, is that Billquis is not doing what she used to do. What she used to do is take men, they worshipped her, she ingested them. It was a fucking feast sort of thing. But in this case, we see that she ingests him vaginally and then she vomits. So I'm wondering, like, is she still an old god? Has she become something else? Or is there another explanation for this?
So my take on this is originally she's attempting to seduce this man for his technical prowess. If she can gain that prowess, she's not reliant on Quantum Boy or Tech Boy to get herself out there to be worshipped. She consumes him almost angrily just to show, like, hey, like, this is what I'm about, bro. And he goes along with it because, fuck it, who wouldn't? And yeah, she gets sick immediately after. I personally took this as not a transformative thing, but rather she claimed a tribute or a sacrifice that maybe was not meant for her because this individual does not worship this lust or this longing or this desire. He worships, the financial aspect, the technical aspect. his worship should belong to Technical Boy, but she claims it as her own. I think that's sort of a poisoned offering that dilutes or would cause her more harm than good.
That makes sense because he's not worshiping her. She's just essentially killing him with her vagina.
So she may still absorb some sort of ability from this, but I think that overall it may diminish her more than enhance her.
Now, speaking of ingestion, I did have a couple odds and ends I want to touch on. The first one is pasties. So pasties were a big part of this episode, and I am so glad pasties are finally getting their due in pop culture. Now, the King Bee and I used to get dinner together in the before times, and somehow, despite all the food options and all the shit we would talk about, the places we were going to go eat, we would always wind up at the Cornish pasty in Tempe, Arizona. I was shocked that Mabel's in Lakeside didn't have pasty options. You go to Cornish pasty, you could choose from like 30 different fillings in your pasties. I was even more shocked, though, that Shadow ordered it and it just showed up. Pasties take for fucking ever.
For those of you who don't know, a pasty is like a gourmet Hot Pocket. They were a food that were made for miners, and it was a filling of meat and potatoes and vegetables that was baked in a crusty bread, and it had this rind across the top. And the rind actually served a mechanical purpose. The rind was there because these miners, their hands were filthy and covered in chemicals like mercury and things that were part of the mining extrusion process. And so they would hold the Hot Pocket by the rind, and they would eat the pasty, and then they'd just chuck away the rind that they had touched with their fingers. Our local Cornish pasty company has lots of different fillings. There's a chicken tikka masala, there's a shepherd's pie, there's a cheeseburger, anything that you would want. Every cultural themed food is available in pasty form. But the traditional pasty is just the beef, potatoes. They're delicious. We love them. And if you're ever in the Cornish Pasty Co. and you see two 40-year-old men sharing a dessert, mind your fucking business.
Bread pudding. All right. And the other thing I wanted to talk about is the music in this episode. So two things I really, really enjoyed. One was as Shadow's getting his first tour of Lakeside by Daylight, we get the instrumental version of Always Something There to Remind Me, which was a nice touch. But the real star musically is something that Ash pointed out. It was the closing song. Now, I heard it. I didn't really think anything of it. And Ash is like, could you believe that? That was fucking crazy. I said, what's it all about? She said, look it up. So Little Margaret is the song that is happening at the end. And it's about this woman. This song goes way, way back. But this version in particular, it's about a woman who sees her lover marry someone else. So she either kills herself or dies of a broken heart. Depends on which version of the song you're listening to. And she visits him as a ghost to ask if he's happy and if he loves his bride. And so as a ghost, she's standing at the foot of his bed, and he tells her that he loves her, Margaret, the most. And so the next day, the guy gets up and he gets on his horse and he goes over to Margaret's house to see her and finds out that no, Margaret's dead. She's in a casket. So he snuggles up next to her and he removes the the funeral shroud and he kisses her and he dies too. Sad tale. Sounds like a Nick Cave song. But what's particularly interesting about it is the name of Shadow's neighbor, right? So the song is called Little Margaret. Shadow's neighbor, that property manager and journalist, is Marguerite Olson. I'm convinced by the tension between the two of them, these two are totally going to bang.
Marguerite Olson. Old song. Maybe. Anyway, they'd better bang, or else I'm going to go on another fucking rant next week about how they introduced a thing and nothing ever came of it.
Well, I mean, it's the perfect setup when you think about it, because if you have Laura in the mix, right, and you've asked after episode 1, is Laura just done? She's dust, obviously. Our favorite ex-lover, Ghost, Laura Moon, might still have a role to play in things, and this song may be hinting us to it.
What a trick. By the way, could you sleep with a woman named Margaret?
Oh, yeah.
Really?
You call her Marge?
Oh, Marge. No.
Margie?
Rhymes with lethargy. Couldn't do it. Sorry, all you Margarets out there. Ain't gonna happen.
This man's off the market. Off the Margaret. And that concludes this week's episode of Shat on TV American Gods. We hope you enjoyed and will join us next week, please, for more. Be sure to follow us on social media and share with a friend. We're on Twitter, Snapchat, and Instagram at Shat on TV. On Facebook, just search for Shat on TV Podcast. The website is shatontv.com. Again, if you want to write in with your theories or your guest about who that peacock was, write in at hosts@shatontv.com or call us at 914-719-SHAT. Also, big announcement, very, very important to note. Our Twitch Instacast has had phenomenally low attendance, and so we are going to cancel that. So you'll still get the deep dive on Wednesdays, but we are no longer doing the Instacast. You're just going to have to wait.
I told him not to tell anyone it had low attendance, but he won't listen to me on anything.
Yeah, it was me. This last week was me, All Might, and Ash. It's 3 people.
What was it last week?
It was like 4 people. No, it was like 8 people last week. But if you want to make it up to us, check out our sister podcast, Shat the Movies, where we join our good friend Big D, Dick Ebert, and Ash Lafley to cover 80s and 90s movies commissioned by you, the listeners. Find past and future episodes at shatthemovies.com, wherever fine podcasts can be found, including iTunes, Google Play, Stitcher, Pandora, Spotify, and YouTube. Be sure to subscribe, and if you stop by iTunes, please leave a 5-star review. That helps the podcast grow. On behalf of my co-hosts, the King Bee, Ash Lafley, and Big D, Dick Ebert, I'm Gene Lyons. Be sure to join us next week for episode 3 of season 3 of American Gods, Ashes and Demons. Until then, thanks for listening, and stay the fuck at home.